All right, hello again, everybody. Welcome back to Airbus 320 Tech Talk. What do all those buttons do? Thank you again so much for joining me. I really appreciate you all tuning in. If this is your first time watching, welcome. If you like what you're hearing and seeing, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It just helps me keep the channel moving forward and keeps this fun, engaging, and exciting for everybody that's watching out there. So I'm here in Boston tonight. Just got in. I apologize. It's been a couple weeks since I was able to film one of these videos. So like I said, thanks for your patience if you're a repeat watcher. But it's holiday time and everybody's busy out there. So let's get back to it though today. Today's discussion, probably a little bit quicker one. We are going to be moving on and talking about the next section on the Airbus, the glare shield here anywhere. It's kind of where we left off last time. So today we're going to be talking about the FCU here, the flight control unit. And sometimes, people, just look at this and just call it the autopilot panel, which is just fine. A lot of us do out on the line as well. But I wanted to first kind of start and just talk to you a little bit about some conceptual things with the Airbus and how it works, and just, how this portion of the panel here kind of fits into all that big picture. So, first of all, when we're talking about the auto flight system on the airplane, it is so much more than just this FCU here. Just by itself. There's a whole lot of programming, specifically a lot that comes through the FMGS there. That if you think about the normal flight, we literally program everything that's going to occur from the point where we're making our takeoff to the point where we land on the arrival runway. So everything in between there, as far as how fast the plane's going, the altitudes, points of navigation, all this kind of stuff, it's programmed into that portion of the system. And like I said, there's a lot that kind of goes on the display screens, or it's kind of part of the auto flight system. And this FCU is just kind of a small piece of, like I said, that big picture. So, the way that I kind of tell people to think about this is, first of all, let's say that everything that we put into the box when we program the airplane to go fly is kind of like the general business plan, or kind of like the long-term plan of everything that's going to happen in the course of our flight. And this FCU here is actually just, a way that, for the most part, we're actually making just kind of temporary, short-term changes to the game plan, if you will. So, there's points in time during our flight when we kind of need to like call an audible, let's say like a quarterback would, because things have kind of changed around us. Now the plan that we had in place before isn't necessarily something that we can do right now, or we might want to temporarily change that, or, any number of things, of course, can, kind of come in to play when we're talking about this. So, kind of keep that in mind as I discuss, a little bit more about the FCU here in general. And that's, like I said, kind of the main, or one of the main reasons that it's there in the first place. So hopefully that concept makes sense to you guys. And, one thing I want to talk about too, as far as the Airbus is concerned, is like, as you guys probably know, if you've watched to this point, the Airbus it is such a highly automated airplane. It's almost like they built the airplane kind of around the auto flight systems, the autopilot and everything. So it has got a really strong, extremely capable autopilot that actually does like an extremely, excellent job at flying the airplane in like every single circumstance. And it's kind of interesting, if you look back, for me personally, I got to fly some aircraft that, had been designed and manufactured, decades earlier than this Airbus did. It's a real contrast when you look at the capabilities of those autopilots and some of those airplanes, and what they did and how they did it and the limitations they had, and quite honestly how not smooth they were in a way by contrast to the Airbus here. It's just kind of interesting, about of course where things have come in aviation and where they're at now. But it's just, like I said, such a marvel, I think, of our modern aircraft, and certainly the Airbus is a glaring example of just that. This is, the same case, with, let's say, the Boeing line, or, the other manufacturers out there, as they've moved things forward. So, like I said, just all that I wanted to tell you guys is the Airbus autopilot is extremely capable, does a phenomenal job of flying the airplane. It's such a tremendous tool that, we have at our disposal there, and it's very nice to have. So, let's talk really briefly about all the buttons and the things on the display here. First of all, along the top, we've just got readouts for the speed, the heading, mode here, the vertical speed, or an FPA if we select it, the altitude pre-select, and I'm sorry, this is on the far right here, the vertical speed column. And if we changed over to the FPA, or flight path angle mode, we would see a plus and minus, in degrees up or down, whatever we're commanded the airplane to do. And I wish, once again, this is such a limitation to, I only have like a few of these, the slides to show you guys. And unfortunately today, just the one that I'm stuck with. So I wish I could kind of show you the different variations of the things we could see on here. And that's, one other thing I'll make mention of early on here is, the way that we use, the autopilot here in the FCU, and there's just all kinds of different things that, we could see as far as our FMAs that appear on the primary flight display and everything. And I could, spend, hours like going over every single possible thing that, we could see up there in all the different scenarios, but it would get really cumbersome. It's just kind of, like I said, a limitation of what I've got to work with right now. So just bear with me. I'm going to try to talk through, as best I can, just using this slide here and kind of explain those things. So like I said, just the readouts here of what, we would see, on the FCU here. And these also have a direct translation. It's interesting that, on the PFD, as we're setting different things here, of course, there's a section where there's an altitude pre-select, display there, and et cetera, for everything that we would notice on this section of the panel here. So it's actually interesting too. Once again, kind of a let's say a carryover maybe from older generation aircraft. The fact that they still have these windows up here so that you can look at and see what you've pre-selected in is kind of old and antiquated in a way, because everything that we do, we're always verifying our FMAs and like what we're seeing on the PFD. We never completely trust that what we're putting in here is actually what the airplane is doing. That's such a big part of our training, is just verifying that essentially we all keep coming back to these FMAs to just make sure the plane is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And there's interesting evidence of this. Some of the aircraft rolling off the assembly lines these days, they've completely done away with this display up here, and you're just solely relying with what you see on your LCD screens, in the flight deck. So it's kind of one little interesting thing to mention about and talk to you guys up there. But as far as the Airbus is concerned, all the times we'll make a selection up here first, and then we'll go down to our PFD and we'll verify it, and we'll just, like I said, make sure the plane is doing what we're trying to get it to do. So. A second very high-level conceptual thing that we need to talk about when we're talking about Airbus auto flight is the difference between the managed mode and the selected mode. This is a very big line in the sand. We talk about flying this thing. So with the managed mode, it's kind of goes back to what I was saying before with like everything we've programmed into the FMGS. That is the managed way that the airplane is flown most of the time. Now when we talk about going into selected mode, this is kind of what I was talking about when we make these these momentary shorter let's say time interval selections to like what the flight modes we're trying to use are in a given circumstance, depending on what we're doing. And so let's just kind of talk really quickly about a real world example. I mean, let's say that you're up at cruise altitude, you're in managed modes, the plane is just handling everything, it's doing what's programmed in the box, and let's say there's a thunderstorm up ahead of us. Well, you can't really program a thunderstorm into the box. So, what we would do in that situation is we would pull the heading knob, we'd go into selected mode, so we'd kind of make this like short-term modification to our route of flight. We're going to steer around the thunderstorm, and once we get around it, we'll steer ourselves back onto our navigation line, or probably get a direct to down the way once we're past the weather. And once we accomplish that, we go back into managed mode, and we go on with our day. So hopefully that kind of gives you just a small idea of one type of scenario where you're shifting back and forth between this like managed mode and selected mode. And as I said, there's all sorts of circumstances, from air traffic control is trying to sequence traffic, they're trying to speed you up, slow you down, put you at different altitudes. All kinds of different things happens in our day-to-day, and that's, like I said, we're a lot of times just shifting gears back and forth between the managed and the selected mode. And bringing it back to this panel here, very generally speaking, first of all these knobs have both a push and a pull and a twist function to them. So like I said, whenever we're pushing the knobs, we're telling the airplane to go back into that managed mode. So for example, pushing speed, pushing the heading knob, pushing the altitude, we're telling the airplane to do the management of those modes specifically themselves. So think about the way they taught us in training. It was kind of a brilliant thing. If you got confused about this, or really from day one, they just said when you're like pushing the knobs, you're like giving control back to the airplane. So you're saying, here, airplane, you do all the work. When you're pulling the knobs, you're saying, hey, I, as the pilot, I want to select it and I want to do some different things. And that's kind of, just like I said, one way that, it was easy for us to draw apart in our minds, the difference between pushing, pulling, managed, selected, all this kind of stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. But like I said, let's just talk about each one of the knobs here. Very simply, the speed knob, like I said, we can select an airspeed or a Mach number that we want the airplane to fly. The heading knob here, actually, interestingly enough, when we pull on it, we can make a heading selection, but if we actually push on it, we're actually rearming the nav mode, so we can get the airplane to kind of re-intercept a course line that's been drawn with the FMGS specifically. The altitude knob, same kind of thing. We can make a pre-selection on the altitude. When we twist the knob and then pushing and pulling it, it shifts the plane back and forth between like a managed climb where it's going to adhere to all the altitudes that we've programmed into the box, or if we make a selected or what's called an open climb or an open descent, it's just telling the airplane I either want to make a full power climb up or a thrust idle descent, and just pitch for whatever airspeed is programmed at the time. So once again, all these different modes. I mean, we could talk for hours about every single finite detail. But that is in the case of the altitude knob there, what it means. On the altitude knob too, if you pay attention here, you can kind of zoom in and see it. There's also a collar here, and you see the selection between the 100 and the 1000 range there, and that just allows us to make altitude selections that are between the 1,000-foot mark. So as you know, most of the time we're flying around, we get cleared to even altitude. So you'll climb to 5,000 feet or climb to 10,000 feet or flight level 380 or whatever it is. But there are periods of time when we do want to make the selection down to the 100 feet markings. And usually, most of the time, this comes into play when you're shooting an approach and you're going in, and the final clearance you'll get from an approach controller a lot of times. This is all based on the height above ground levels. They'll tell you, maintain 3,200 feet until you're established. Then you're cleared for the approach kind of thing. So there's kind of an instance where you might make a hundreds of foot selection, as part of what you're trying to tell the plane to do. But as I said, just sliding this collar back and forth just allows you to make that selection of the hundreds of feet or just the straight thousands of feet. The next knob on the right, it does a couple things for us. If you read here just to the right of the knob, if you want the plane to just completely level off for whatever reason. Let's say that there was you were in a descent and the air traffic controller told you to abruptly stop your descent because there's traffic below you, or some reason. You could just push that knob once, and it's going to just do as the placarding describes here. It's just going to completely tell the plane to level off, hold its altitude. If you spin the knob, depending on if you are in vertical speed mode or FPA mode, it's just going to dial in whatever the selected vertical rate up or down what you want, or the flight path angle either up or down what you want. And once again, this is one that you might not see used a whole lot, but we certainly use the FPA mode when we're doing something like a localizer approach. We want to tell the airplane to fly, like let's say a 3-degree slope down to the MDA, or the vertical speed mode is one that we'll kind of use here and there. And this is just kind of like a pilot technique type of thing. Like I said, 1,000,001 different scenarios we could talk about. A common one that you see sometimes is let's say you're way far out from the airport, and you're kind of coming down in the terminal area, and let's say air traffic control gives you a descent down to a very low altitude. So let's say you're up at 10,000 feet and they want you to descend down to 2,000 feet, but you're way far away. You as the pilot, you kind of know in your brain, you're like, well, I could use this open descent, just hustle all the way down to 2,000 feet, but now I'm 20 miles from the airport, I'm way lower than I need to be. It's just not necessary. So kind of a generally more efficient way to fly the airplane is just to maybe make a 1,000 foot per minute, nice gradual, easy descent. So there's no sense in getting the airplane that low, that far from the airport. Just as I said, kind of a technique thing. There's nothing wrong if they've cleared you down to this lower altitude to descend all that way. But most of the time, altitude's our friend. We want to kind of fly the airplane as efficiently as possible. So that's one instance where we might use a vertical speed selection. So that kind of hits on all the big knobs here. Just There's a couple push buttons as well. Just the one here, all that it does is it switches the selection between, telling the airplane to target an indicated airspeed or a Mach number. As I said, we kind of touched on it a little bit so far, but the heading and the track and the vertical speed and FPA mode, those are just two modes that we can switch back and forth between, depending on, like I said, if we want to use a vertical speed selection or an FPA selection. And there's also one other very interesting thing that happens when we switch between these two modes. Most of the time it stays in the heading vertical speed mode, but sometimes when we're flying a visual approach, and I wish I had pulled the graphic before I sat down and made the talk here today, but if you hit it and you tell the plane to go into the track mode, you actually get something called the bird that comes up, and it's this little kind of circle with a crosshair looking thing in it. And it tells us the flight path vector, actually, of what the airplane's doing. So it's kind of, I could make a whole nother video to talk about this specifically, but all that I want to tell you right now is that it's just one more kind of visual tool that we have to keep ourselves, just backed up. Let's say we're making a visual approach and we're not necessarily using any other, guidance other than what we're kind of seeing outside the airplane. It just kind of helps us to stay on a nice, 3-degree glide path, down the final approach course. And it also can kind of tell us, if any adverse trends are developing. So if we're starting to sink a lot, you'll see the bird kind of drop out below you, and it'll just kind of give you an early forewarning of things kind of going awry with your approach. Or it's a really efficient way to just, if you want to fly completely level, you just line up the bird like right on the horizon, and the plane, you could fly whatever altitude you want very easily, just visually looking at this depiction of the bird there, like I said. So I want to try to come back and make another video about that, because it's a really interesting concept, and hopefully you guys have some inkling or idea about what that is, but just a couple things to tell you there. The next push button here, just the metric altitude button. You could switch between meters and feet. Most of the time in the United States here, we're just operating in feet, but if you're operating the airplane in other parts of the world, you might be needing to fly meters. So, some aircraft are transversing, two different areas where there is this need to kind of switch back and forth between the two units of measure. So that's just what the button's there for. And the remaining push buttons here, just the first one on the left here, just the localizer button. So it just tells the airplane to arm the localizer mode and capture it if we're steering it into it. The autopilot 1 and autopilot 2 buttons here, we have two autopilots in the airplane that they're essentially there for redundancy, and they back each other up in the case of an instrument ILS type of landing. But most frequently, or regularly when we're flying the airplane, just normally, depending on if it's the captain's or the first officer's leg, we'll just kind of switch off. So if it's the captain's leg, he'll just arm autopilot 1, and that'll take the plane throughout the entire course of the flight until we get to our destination. And if you wanted to fly an ILS approach, you actually use two autopilots at the same time to do that. But like I said, generally speaking, we're either just using autopilot 1 or autopilot 2, depending on whose leg it is. The auto thrust button here just simply rearms the auto thrust. If for some reason you turned it off, you could just reach up, hit the push button there, and get it to rearm. The expedite button, it's there. We don't necessarily use it a whole lot, though. All that the expedite button does is it tells the airplane to, in the climb or just the climb scenario, it tells us to, or would tell the airplane to climb at green dot, basically, or climb as aggressively as possible as you could to get up to whatever altitude. And the reason why I say that it's not used a whole lot is just because sometimes, like, let's say you're flying around in a turbulent condition, you don't always want the plane to be aggressively like pitching up and going like right to green dot, which is getting you like really close to a stall. So it can be a little bit alarming if you use this mode. And sometimes the airplane can kind of lag a little bit, so you might actually find yourself in a situation where the airplane slows below green dot. And this is certainly not the type of thing that we want to be doing. So most of the time, I will tell you this, at least at my air carrier, like I said, the expedite button is very rarely used. But if you are in an instance where you want to make an expedited climb, we'll just usually go into a selected speed mode, and you can just kind of dial the speed back, use an open climb, And you'll set the speed to something above green dot, so you can still kind of get an aggressive climb going using this mode, but you're not just telling the airplane, hey, go right to green dot, which is what it's designed to do. And I think I'm a little bit hazy on it. I need to go back and review it, but I might have mentioned it slightly incorrectly. You can use an expedited descent mode, and it's going to be the type of thing where it's going to set you up with an aggressive descent. I can't remember exactly, because we use this so infrequently, we very rarely talk about it, but it's going to give you something close to max forward airspeed just to get the airplane to hustle down and get this expedited type of, like I said, either climb or descent facilitated in such and such a fashion. So last one here is the APPR button. So we just use this to tell the airplane, hey, I want you to arm approach mode and either fly down on the ILS or the GPS approach if we're doing one of those. So very, very simply put there. So that wraps up pretty much everything I wanted to tell you guys about the FCU itself. Hopefully that makes sense. As always, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to shoot a message, and I'll try to do my best job to get those fielded. So that leads to the last part here, which is the Q&A section. Had a couple questions come in since the last video, so I wanted to field those really quickly. So the first one comes from Leonidas G003. So thank you very much, Leonidas, for tuning into the channel. I appreciate you writing in and asking a question. He was watching the video where we talked a little bit about the manual engine starts, and there's a mode on the engine start panel that says crank, and he wanted to know what exactly that is or what it's all about. It's a good question. We'll certainly talk about this when I get to the section of the panel that deals specifically with the engine starts there. But just really quickly, that the crank, what that's there for is just if you want to like spin the engine up, or like just get the all the inner workings of the engine to just rotate, but you don't actually want the engine to start, you can tell the airplane to do that. We sometimes call this motoring the engine. The reason why you might want to do this is because if you're trying to, let's say you're trying to clear out some residual either fuel or oil that sometimes can kind of be left in the airplane, the engine area there after maybe an unsuccessful start or some other malfunction, or sometimes you'll use the crank to cool the inner portion of the engine just to get it to the point where you can start it again, kind of thing. Kind of a rare thing. And like I say, with the Airbus, there's all these automated protections built in that kind of most of the time you're not needed to do that. But as I said, the crank mode is just there to get the airplane to allow all the fans and everything to spin up without actually starting the engine. And, I can tell you an interesting story actually about a real world situation where we actually used the crank feature. It was kind of an interesting little story, but we had finished our flight. We just pulled into the gate at Newark Airport, and we're kind of wrapping everything up in the flight deck. And one of the rampers came up kind of frantically to the flight deck, and he said, "Hey guys, there's a fire in the number 2 engine, like in the back side of the engine pipe there." And we're like, "Oh my gosh, like what the heck's going on?" So we both ran outside and we took a look in the the exhaust section of the engine, and there was like a little bit of fire burning back in there. And what it was there was a little bit of fuel and oil, whatever it was, that had kind of seeped out when the engine had shut down. And this can happen. It kind of pools and puddles in the aft section of the engine there, and there must have been like a hot spot or something on the metal there on the exhaust system of the engine. It was just hot enough to get this thing to the flash point, and it ignited the little puddle of fuel that was there. So of course this was like a serious situation. So we ran back up to the flight deck and we called ops, and we told them to get the fire department out there. But the captain was thinking really fast, and this was a great call. He went to the crank position. We got the airplane. We motored the engine. We spun it up, which passed a lot of air through this section of the engine. It actually did the job of blowing that fire out and blowing that the vapors in there and the unburned liquid fuel and oil in there. Just blew it out the back end, and it blew the fire out. And it was basically like no big deal after that. But that's just the one instance where I've kind of seen it used on the line. So hopefully that makes sense to you, Leonidas, and let me know if you need any more clarification. I'll do my best to explain that further. And the second question comes from my most loyal subscriber, Abby Thomas. Thank you again so much for watching. Hope you're having a great day out there today. But Abby had a question about, he was watching or looking at some photos or watching another video, he said, about an Airbus de-icing procedure. And this kind of goes back a few sections back. We had talked about the ditching push button switch in the overhead, and I won't go over all the intricacies of that. You guys can go back and watch that video if you want detail on that. But basically, Abby's question, he wanted to know about why would you be using this ditching push button in the case of when you're de-icing the aircraft. And it's a great question. It's something you wouldn't probably immediately associate between those two circumstances and that system itself, but think about it this way, Abby. When we're de-icing the airplane, there are these portions of the insides of the airplane that we want to try to prevent de-icing fluid from working their way in there and getting inside of those areas, because they could get themselves into the ECS system. These chemicals, of course, are not things we want to be breathing, or it could get in the inner workings of the underside of the airplane, the electronics, all this kind of stuff. And for obvious reasons, it's something that we want to prevent, so we don't damage anything down there. So what this is all about is, if you remember, that ditching push button, it closes the avionics, the ventilation, the doors there that we talked about. It closes the pack flow control valves. It closes the cabin outflow valve, and it closes the ram air door if it's open. So really, this is just part of sealing the airplane up as best we can before we go and take this, de-ice fluid bath. With the idea of trying to keep the anti-icing or de-icing fluid out of these given sections of the airplane before we open everything up back again and return it to normal, and we go off flying about our normal day. So hope that clears it up for you, Abby. Thank you again so much for watching. I really appreciate you participating and writing in. And for the rest of you out there, if you have questions about the Airbus, about flying in general, I really appreciate you all tuning in, and I appreciate the engagement. This kind of keeps it fun and exciting for me. So I hope you're all having a great day out there. Thanks again so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of good stuff, and we'll talk to you soon.